Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind plagued with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Does your spinning mind keep you awake? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems, the ones you can't solve right now and will be easier to solve well rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns of the story, but slowly letting go and drifting into sleep. Now, many podcasts put their promotion and cup rattling stuff halfway through or even towards the end. But because if all goes well, you're going to be asleep long before we get there, I need to put this slightly sordid stuff up front. This show is brought to you mostly by the help of supporters on Patreon. I'm hearing from people all the time how valuable that they find the show, and those supporters who help to fund the show, if they have the means, to keep it going and help me reach new audiences are very much appreciated. So if you're somebody who is making use of Sleepy Time Tales regularly to help you deal with sleeplessness, and you have the urge to support your show, and most importantly, if you can, because I understand times are hard, please take a look at patreon.com/sleepytimetales, or even patron.sleepytimetales.net, or hit the link in the show notes, or go from the website to take a look at what you can do to help support. You will have the satisfaction of knowing that you're contributing to the rest and lifestyle improvement of thousands of people. Over and above that, there are real rewards available from as little as $2 a month. There are early releases to weekly bonus episodes and special edits of the main show. Special shout out this week to all the $5 and higher supporters, some of whom have been supporting the show almost since day one. Those are Jess, Nicola, Wynn, Kat, Michael, Nova, Kristen, Eric, and Regan, who signed up recently. They all get the weekly bonus catnap episodes like the ones you're going to be listening to tonight, as well as bonus edits and early access to the weekly episodes. And that early access is also available to $2 supporters, so if $5 is a bit rich for you, you can still get something for as little as $2. Other than the monthly support though, there are other ways to help. There's also the tip jar, the merchandise store, and a few other options, also all in the show notes. But another huge way to help, besides putting your hands in your pocket and taking money out, is to simply spread the word. Sleeplessness is a crisis today, particularly in these rough pandemic times, which is something I've kind of avoided talking about, except very obliquely. I've been having pandemic dreams myself, so it's a rough time for a lot of people. Even if you're not directly impacted, it's a stressful, traumatic time to be living. So if you know somebody who you think will benefit from listening to Sleepy Time Tales, simply let them know. If you recommend the show on social media, make sure to tag me in so that I know and I can thank you. The tag is @SleepyTimeTales on both Instagram and Twitter. And I do know that some of the longer running people, including the people that support the show on Patreon, have been very instrumental in spreading the word as well. And it's really as simple as that. You helping me to reach new people, and you helping the people in your life that you care about getting a good night's sleep. Last thing I need to do in this little promo section, I don't need to do it even, but I feel it's important because it's very important to the identity of the show, is I need to give a shout out to the music. The song is Un Désert by Kumiko. The music is available on the Free Music Archive, and I've linked their website in the show notes, as they've got some very cool stuff that they release under different names, depending on how it sounds, that I recommend checking out. Most of it is available for use for free use under Creative Commons, so if you have a podcast or a video, or a YouTube show or something like that, you can find really great stuff there if you dig through. And I think that's enough of that tonight. Thank you for taking the time to listen, and let's get back to the show. So, what exactly is Sleepy Time Tales? What is it for? It's a bit of a strange idea, isn't it? A podcast that you're supposed to fall asleep to. But lack of sleep is a health crisis in the 21st century, and this is a podcast that is intended to help those that it can to get a restful night. Do you find yourself lying awake at night with your mind spinning and emotions in turmoil with anxieties of 21st century life? Do you wake up in the middle of the night and find yourself not quite able to doze back off at 3 a.m.? I'm here to help. My name is Dave, and I'm your narrator, here to help you into a restful night. I'm someone who has struggled to sleep ever since I was a baby. My parents had sleepless nights with me for many years, and even once I got old enough not to bother them anymore, I always struggled to sleep. I eventually discovered the tendency for droning voices, especially male ones, to act almost like a tranquilizer for me. I'd go to bed with my podcast to listen to because I'd come to terms with the fact that I was going to be awake all night, and find myself waking up at the music at the end, having missed everything that I was actually trying to listen to. I eventually started listening to podcasts specifically for the purpose of helping me sleep. And once I worked through a backlog of a few different video gaming podcasts, I discovered that there are some out there that are specifically for the purpose of helping people sleep. Someone who's selecting a story or a book or making something up on the spot to try help people to sleep. And I found some that worked very well for me. But often when I recommended them to others, they didn't resonate for various reasons. Sometimes they didn't like the topic or the theme, or sometimes they just didn't like the narrator's voice. And I thought to myself, I'm someone with this boring, deep, drony voice, so let me try use it to help those that I can. Now, every episode starts with this long intro. If I get a bad review on this show, it's generally because somebody doesn't like this intro. But it's there for a reason. It's actually there for two reasons. Firstly, I actually need to explain to new people who've discovered it what it's for. The idea of a sleep podcast is a bit of a strange one, and I think I need to make a case for why I think it could be beneficial for you. And I need to explain how I think you should engage with it, or how it's useful to engage with it. I'm not here to tell you what to do, but I am here to make suggestions. And secondly, for people who have been listening to the show for a while, it has a very important function. A lot of people may think that the story that you're about to listen to at the end of the intro is the point of the show, but that's not really the case. This intro is actually the cornerstone of it. Because once you're used to the idea of listening to the show and are over the resistance of the strangeness of the idea of listening to someone babble on in your sleep, the story is just there to be there. It's me keeping you company and droning in your ears. But for people who have been listening to the show for a while, this intro is where you start preparing yourself to sleep. This is where you have a drink of water and maybe listening to this while you brush your teeth or snuggling into your blankets. Make sure your environment is warm but not too warm. Because what we're trying to do here is effectively build a sort of safe space for you. A comfortable environment, a cave or a nest for you to settle into so that when sleep comes for you, you're not going to be fighting it. Now, as far as I know, there's a couple of different ways to engage with the show. For me, when I listen to my sleep podcasts, I actually need something to engage with. I need a story or an event that lets me keep my mind on something specific, on a point or a story, so that my mind doesn't spin out into stress and anxiety, which are the things that keep me awake at night. I need to focus just enough, not to resist the embrace of a night's sleep when it comes for me. Some people may need something a little bit more primal, some background, some kind of white noise. Maybe people need the sound of rain or the wind in the trees or the sound of the ocean or some boring dude droning on and telling you a story. Tonight I've got something a little bit special. It's a sampler of some of the Catnap minisodes that are available to Patreon supporters at the $5 level. As you're listening to this now, this is episode 79, there are 59 of these available for supporters. And if you enjoy them and would like to support the show and hear more and hear another one every week, usually out on a Wednesday or a Thursday, you can sign up there. These stories there's a story about some explorers in South America being saved from deadly altitude sickness by a local native boy. There's a fable of how the elephant got his trunk, and also a more modern creation myth about how day and night came to be. But whatever the stories are, whether it's something long-term or something shorter, whatever matters, what matters is that you don't fall asleep. Just keep a light mental grip on the story, whatever it is, and allow sleep to come for you. Now, obviously, I'm hoping that you're asleep before I get to the end of the episode, but it's important you don't feel pressurized. If this is your first night listening to the show, it probably won't work for you. I would say give it a solid 3 nights to see if it starts to work. You may need time to get used to my listening to my voice or my strange accent, or just the oddity of the whole idea of this thing. I mean, it is a strange idea. I was resistant to listening to my first sleep podcast, and I now cannot live without them. It's also possible that one episode is just not long enough. What I do actually is I don't struggle so much to fall asleep anymore. But what happens to me is I wake up at 3 a.m. and I struggle to get back to sleep. So what I do is I download a whole bunch of episodes of the sleep podcast that I listen to, and then enough to listen to one all night, basically. And then I start with the latest episode, and then I just let them run. And then when I wake up at 3 a.m., the voices are still there, and I just pop my earbuds in, and there I go again. Sometimes I even wake up 30 or 60 minutes before my alarm goes, and believe it or not, I just do the same thing. It may seem strange to even bother to go back to sleep if you only got 30 or 60 minutes ahead of you, but I've got to tell you, that can be the best part of my night. There's something about just letting go and relaxing completely before the alarm that is deeply satisfying. I'll often wake up from those bits completely rested and refreshed. But whatever happens, it's very important that you try to relax. If you're new to the show and prone to late nights lying staring at the ceiling, this may seem strange to you, so give it a chance. And that's the basic idea. You relax and you lie in the dark, and while you do that, I'll tell you a tale. So relax, dear listener, my nighttime friend who has elected to lie in the dark, listening to my voice. You will always be safe with me, because I'm here to help you relax, to do a small part to help you improve your life in a big way. People don't sleep very well these days, and it makes life harder. So I'm here to do my small part to help you in a big way, to help you to face tomorrow and the day after, well rested and better able to cope and process. I believe very strongly in the benefits of kindness. I want to be kind to you. I want to share kindness with you. And most importantly, I need you to be kind to yourself. Don't beat yourself up or rebuke yourself over not sleeping. Don't get tense if you just can't get over the edge of sleep, even with me here in your ears trying to help. Frustration is one of the great enemies of a good night's sleep, and the intention with this podcast is to help short-circuit that frustration, to distract the feeling we get when we blame ourselves for not being able to let go and drift into the dark. So take a breath. Forgive the fact that you can't sleep and let my voice wash over you. Take another breath. Imagine the warm darkness rising up, inviting you to sleep and to a better life starting tomorrow. And if you can't let go, forgive yourself and try again tomorrow. If you've had a life of insomnia, sleep is something like an enemy. But it's not your enemy. It's a natural process that we've been pulled away from by stress and life, and supposed progress shining bright lights in our eyes at all hours. I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So if you're still with me, thank you for staying. If you're already asleep, we'll chat again soon. And of course, you aren't hearing me, except maybe in a dream. From The Enchanted Burrow by Charles F. Lummis. A boy of the Andes. Probably they would not have seen Ramayanga at all, but for the llamas. There was enough else to look at. The overpowering walls of the mountains on both sides seemed to turn the eyes even as they turned the foaming Rimac into a channel from which there was no escape. Up at the end of the cleft was such a sight as no man can long hold his eyes from. The black peak of Chinchan, bent down with its load of eternal winter. There is something awful about the snow that never melts. The great blank fields, the wrinkled glaciers, the savage ice cornices, the black rocks that peer out hopelessly here and there. It is so different from the friendly white we know and welcome for its sleigh rides and coastings, its snowmen and snowballings. It was far up the summit of the Peruvian Cordillera, at the very foot of the last wild peaks that stand 18,000 feet in the sky, where the panting mules trudged 3,000 feet below the peaks, was low green herbage and 500 feet lower yet the little torrent. White as its mother snows, roared and chuckled alternatively to the uneven wind. But up yonder all was so white and still, their eyes kept lifting up to it, forgetful of the dangerous trail. The mules could take care of that. They, poor brutes, seemed ill at ease. They breathed in short, loud gasps, and every 40 feet or so they stopped and rested for a few moments, unmindful of the spur. Yet then, when they were ready, they started up again of their own accord, sighing heavily. They would not last much longer at this rate. "I think I'll get off and walk a while," said the younger of the two, a bronzed, sinewy man of 25. "It spoils even this scenery for me to see the suffering of the mules. One wouldn't think they'd play out so on such a good trail." "It is not the grade," remarked the professor quietly, "as perhaps you will learn. I am sorry for the mules too, but it is better to risk them than something more important." "Why, you speak as though there is some danger about it," said the younger man, who was now striding sturdily along, leaving his animal to follow. Many a time he had climbed Pikes Peak and its brother giants of Colorado, and once had stood on the cone of Popocatépetl. A peak was nothing to him, and as for this excellent path, it was mere child's play. The professor watched him without a word, but with an expression half quizzical, half grave, and after 100 yards he spoke. "You don't seem quite so springy, Barton. I never saw you heavy-footed before." "Well, the truth is, Professor," gasped Barton, rather shamefacedly, "I feel most remarkably queer. My knees ache as they never did before, though I wouldn't mind that so much. But I cannot seem to breathe well. Here my heart and lungs are pounding away as if I'd been sprinting for the 220-yard record. It is enough to make a man ashamed of himself." "No cause at all for shame, my dear boy. You are simply learning what everyone has to learn who tempts great altitudes. Now get on your mule." "No, I'll wear this thing off," cried the athlete impatiently. "I'm no puny boy to give up just because I felt a little wrong. I'll just keep at it and beat it yet." "Barton," said the older man, in a tone his companion had never heard him use before, "you get on that mule and you let us have no more nonsense. I like your pluck, and it is because you have more real sand, as they say in our West, than any young man I know that I picked you out for this journey. But courage is a dangerous thing unless you mix it with brains. You must learn that there are some things pluck cannot overcome, and this is one of them. Mount then." Barton obeyed with rather an ill grace, and promptly got angry with himself at realizing what a relief it was to be perched again in the ridiculously comfortable Peruvian saddle. He could not get over a feeling of shame that the muscles which had borne the cruelest tests of the frontier should now have played the baby, as he put it, and rode on somewhat sulkily. It was here that Ramon Yinga stumbled into their lives. and as I've said, all by the doing of llamas. As the travellers rounded a sharp turn in the trail, the mules stopped suddenly face to face with the two strangest animals that Barton had ever seen. Shabby, grotesque figures they were, with splay feet, long awkward legs, and bodies looking like long tussocks of dry grass. But their necks were the worst. Tall and ungainly as stovepipes covered with hair. Their backs were hardly so high as those of the undersized mules. But on those unspeakable necks, their heads were quite on a level with Barton's. And such heads! They were disproportionately small and ludicrously narrow, with pointed ears, malignant little faces, and lips wickedly drawn back. Why, I never saw anything except a rattlesnake look so vindictive, cried Barton. What on earth are they? That is the national bird of Peru, replied the professor roguishly. We are apt to see many up here. In fact, if we had any daylight in Casapalca, you would have noticed many hundreds of them, for they bring all the ore to the stamp mills and do most of the freighting besides. Lower than 10,000 feet you will hardly ever find them. The llama is a mountain animal, and soon dies if taken to the coast. So that is the llama. But I thought they called them the Peruvian sheep, and these looked no more like sheep than any mule does. It got that foolish name from the closest naturalists. No one who ever saw a llama could fail to recognize it for a camel. Smaller and longer haired than the eastern beast and without a hump, but a true camel. It is a funny-looking brute, laughed Barton. It seems to put in its time thinking what a grudge it has against everybody. Get out of the way, you standing grievances. The professor and the young frontiersman had thus far enjoyed the pause of the mules. But now the need of pushing on recurred to their minds, and Barton's exclamation was meant as a signal for advance. But the llamas stood stolidly blocking the trail. He drummed his spurs against his mule, whereat the animal took 2 steps forward and stopped, bracing back, unmindful of the rolls. The llamas did not take a step, only they seemed to drop their bodies a little upon those long legs. Why, they're not such fools as they look, cried Barton, whose sharp eye understood the trifling motion. See, they're going to give us the edge. The trail was 2 feet wide, an endless thread of shelf hewn along the mountain wall. On the right, the dark, great slope ran up to the very clouds. On the left, one could snap a pebble into the white torrent, 500 feet below. I've heard that they always take the wall, the professor rejoined, and that when 2 llama trains meet on one of these trails, it is almost impossible to make a passing. Sometimes they even shove each other off the cliff. I guess we'd better not force the right of way. A tumble into the Rimac there is more than I care for. And Barton jumped from his mule and advanced upon the blockaders, waving his arms threateningly. Look out, cried the professor. But before the words were fairly off his tongue, the foremost llama opened its ugly mouth and spat at Barton in fury. At this unpleasant salutation, he retreated hastily. That is their weapon of defense, said the professor, and their saliva is wonderfully acrid. It's as well you didn't get it in the face. But I wish they would get out of the way. We have no time to spare. Just then there was another surprise. A figure hardly less remarkable than the camels slid down from the overhanging hillside and stood in the path looking at the startled travellers. It was a dwarfish creature, not 4 feet tall, with a large round head, a broad strong body, and very short legs, peculiarly bundled up in unfamiliar clothes. A boy. What in the world was he doing on that impossible slope? What a goat he must be. Halloa, cried Barton, as soon as he could find a voice. God give you good day, sirs, answered the lad gravely in thick Spanish. Wake me so little and I will get you by. With this he called Upa to the llamas and lifting his fingers as if to point them up the trail. Ordinarily they would have obeyed, but the aggressive manner of Barton had roused their obstinacy, and they did not budge. The boy put his shoulder to the ribs of one and heaved hard, but the brute stood its ground. Well, it is to wait, said he, and ran about the path, gathering up very small pebbles until his shabby hat was full. Then he sat down on a boulder that jutted from the bank, settling himself as if for a long rest, and threw a mild and measured pebble at each llama, They turned their heads a little and wrinkled their disagreeable noses. He waited a moment and then pitched 2 more pebbles, which had the same effect. So he sat, slowly and mechanically tossing his harmless missiles upon the dense hair of his charges. Evidently, he was in no hurry, and the 2 travellers, impatient as they were, had too much wisdom of experience to try pushing him. They sat quietly in their saddles, watching the droll scene. It was very ridiculous to need deliverance from 2 stupid beasts, and to get it from such an owlish little tatterdemalion. His ragged clothing was of very thick, coarse cloth, and upon his feet were the clumsy Yankees or rawhide sandals of mountain Peru, and he wore thick stockings rising to his knees. Over his trousers was a curious garment, half apron and half leggings, and oversleeves of the same material, hung with a cord about his neck, came up over the elbows of his coat. These 2 garments were knit in very strange patterns, amid which were square brown llamas wandering up and down a grey background. Around his waist was a woven belt, now very old, but of beautiful colours and workmanship. And his face, what a brown round riddle. "How do you call yourself, friend?" asked the professor in Spanish. "And have you 10 years or 100? "Ramon Inga, senor, and the other I do not know. I have been here a long time, ever since I built the mill at Casablanca." "You must be around 15 then, and where do you live?" "There, above," answered Ramon, tossing another pebble. "A curious habit of the mountaineers," said the professor. "These Indians, instead of living in the valleys, climb up to the very tops of these peaks and build their squalid stone hovels. They seem to think nothing of the eternal clambering up and down." An hour crawled by, and the stones in Ramon's hat were running low. Suddenly the brown llama turned with a snort of disgust and strode off up the trail. The white one hesitated a moment, snorted, and followed. "That way they get tired, sirs," said the boy, emptying his hat and pulling it down upon his thatch of black hair. "I take a good club to them," growled Barton, who had great confidence in the Saxon way of forcing things. "No, the boy is quite right. It is another case wherein you must not try to be smarter than nature. The llama is the stubbornest brute alive. A mule is vacillating compared to him. If you put a pound too much on his load, he will lie down and you might beat him to death or build a fire beside him, but he would not get up. Nobody but a Peruvian Indian can do anything with a Peruvian camel, and Ramon has just shown us the proper tactics. Hurt the animal and he only grows more sullen, but the pebbles merely tease him until he can bear it no longer. And really he repays patience, for he is the only animal that can work effectively at these altitudes, where horses and mules are practically useless. But alidante." "Is your excellency going to Cerro de Pascos?" asked the little Peruvian, running alongside the mule and looking up at the professor with unusual animation in his non-committal face. He had never spoken with Yankees before, and indeed for any stranger to notice him kindly was a new experience. He liked these pale men, and a dim little wish to please them warmed his heart. That big young man, why, he was taller than any Serrano in the Cordillera. It was good. Ramon had seen money a few times, but that round, shiny soul which the stranger had tossed him when the llamas moved was the first he had ever held in his hand, and it was almost a worry to be so rich. But the other man, with little grey hair above his ears, who only looked at him so and spoke as if he knew him, he surely was very great, and it was to him that the ragged little boy had said Excellencia. His face was kindly, and there were little smiles at the edges of his mouth, though he did not laugh. "No, hijito, little son," he answered. "We are not bound to the mines. We are going to climb the Chinchan to look at the ice cornices and to measure them." Even Ramon looked astonished at this. If a Serrano had said it, everyone would know he was crazy. Or if it were the young man, well, what would you expect of anyone who would give away a whole soul? But this one, whatever he did, it must be right. He certainly was not crazy, he still... "But the soroche, your excellency," ventured the boy. "For all strangers have it, and many die, even in crossing the slope. Only we who were born here can go so high." "We have to go, my boy, for I must look at the snowfields and the cliffs of ice and measure them," said the professor kindly. "I know well of the mountain sickness, and we will be very careful. Besides, we are both very strong. It is not always of the strong, persisted Ramon. Sometimes the sick cross in safety, and those who are very large and red, even larger than your Excellency's friend, fall suddenly and never rise again, for the soroche is stronger than any. You are quite right, my wise friend. It is terrible, but all do not fall victims, and we must brave it. At the least, Excellency, let me go also, for I know these hills very well, and perhaps I could help. As for the llamas, my brother Sancho comes even yonder, and he will herd them. You won't really take the little rat up there, will you, Professor? Broke in Barton. It will be the death of him. I only hope we may be as safe as I know he will be. Está bien, my boy. Vamos. At 9 the next morning, the three were entering the edge of the snowfields. They had camped for the night in a deserted hovel at the head of the valley, and there the mules could be seen grazing, pulling as far down bull as their ropes would allow. The hut was not a mile behind, but the travellers had been ever since daylight coming thus far. The professor looked old, and Barton's big chest was heaving violently. As for Ramon, he clambered along steadily and soberly, stopping only when he saw the others had stopped. By noon they were at the foot of the last ridge, in a great rounding bay flanked by two spurs of the upper peak. The curving rim far overhead was a savage cliff of eternal ice, a cliff of 1,500 feet sheer. At the top a great white brow projected many yards, overhanging the bluish precipice. It is a noble cornice, gasped the professor, as they sank upon the snow to rest for the 100th time since morning. But I fear we made a mistake. We should not have tried this without waiting a few weeks in Casapalca to get acclimated. It's awful, groaned Barton. My head feels as if it would burst, but I'll be hanged if I give up. And the resolute young man fairly snatched himself to erectness and started towards the spur. But with the third step his tall form swung half around and swayed an instant and fell as a dead pine falls in the wind, and lay heavily upon the snow. His face was black, and a bright red stream trickled from each nostril as the professor sank on his knees beside him, crying huskily, "My poor boy, I have killed you." The professor's face had a strange look too. His eyes were very red and swollen, but that was from the merciless glare of the snow, and in his cheeks a grey shadow seemed to be struggling with unnatural purple. And he was so unlike the professor of yesterday. He seemed so dull, even stupid. "Come, Excellency," Ramon was shouting in his ear. "It is the soroche, the mountain sickness, and none can fight it. We must be gone from here, else very soon you are both dead. Come." The small brown fist was tugging at the old man's shoulder, and the quaint boyish voice was a strange thrill. The professor understood. Dazed as he was, the way in which Ramon had said that one word, "come," roused and cheered him like the far bugle call which tells of reinforcements to the besieged. He was not alone. Here was help. The help of a dwarfed Indian boy of 15. But that is often the very sort we need. Not muscle so much as the elbow touch of a staunch heart. "But Barton," cried the professor. He could no longer think clearly and instinctively. He returned to Ramon as a superior. "Barton, we cannot leave. Barton." The Serrano lad looked at the prostrate figure and then at the professor. But even in those bloodshot eyes, Ramon read something that decided him. It was very hard and more dangerous so, but the friend man loved the other. The other must be tried for too. Ramon unwound his long woven belt and passed it under Barton's back. The ends he drew up under the armpits and crossed them at the back of the neck, giving one end to the professor and keeping one himself. Then, when they pulled apart, the crossing of the belt supported Barton's head. "Now," cried Ramon, and edging strongly, the two dragged the heavy form along the snow to the edge of the steep slope. The professor's face was purple and drops of blood beaded his fingertips. "Let me, senor," said the boy, and taking both ends of the belt over his shoulder, he went plunging down the declivity. Barton's limp head bumping against his legs and Barton's body and heels dragging in the soft snow, just enough to act as a brake. As for the professor, he stumbled after as best as he could, with vague eyes and bursting veins and treacherous legs. Sometimes he fell forward and ploughed a rod in the snow, and once he was beginning to roll, but Ramon leapt and stopped him just in time. And so at last they came to the end of the snow. The boy laid his burden upon the matted grass with the head uphill and piled the little drift of snow about the head. "Put it so also to your head," said he, "and I will bring the mules." With that he was racing off down the hill in knowing zigzags, though it looked too steep for a goat. In half an hour a very tired boy was getting 2 helpless men upon 2 almost helpless mules. Perhaps if the latter had been able to object he could not have succeeded, but by the help of the slope and hauling with his belt over the saddle from the downhill side, he presently had both up. Barton's feet he tied together under the mule and Barton's hands around its neck. The professor could sit up in a stupid way, and Ramon tied only his feet. "Hold still," he cried loudly and sternly, but with the same little quiver in his voice, and taking both bridle reins in one hand he plunged down the hill, his weight thrown forward upon the hard bits, so that the reluctant mules had no choice but to follow. The only one who remembers much of that grim journey is Ramon, and he is not much given to talking. No one knows just what he does think of it. The professor's clear recollection begins with finding himself on board the train at Casablanca, a train of that most wonderful railroad in the world, the railroad above the clouds that clambers up and burrows through Cordillera of Peru. Before that, only hazy memories of a vast mountain wall leaning over to crush him, a winding path in the air, a queer boy's voice coming from nowhere, with little Spanish words of cheer, and now a round, brown face from the opposite seat was watching him seriously, even tenderly, the professor fancied, while the burly conductor was saying, "I never seen it come any closer. However the boy got you in beats my time, and I saw he hated to leave you, so I says to him, says I, just get in, Sonny, and go down to Lima with us, and I'll fetch you back if I lose my job. He's the right sort he is, and you'll be all right as soon as you get down there. That's the only medicine for this rochi." All right, they were the next day in the capital. Even Barton was able to sit up, and he nodded weakly as the professor said to Ramon, "My boy, I would like you to go with us. We have to travel much in Peru, and if you will accompany us, you will earn good wages, and you shall be as my son, for neither of us would be alive now if we had not had a little hero with us. Will you come?" Joy flashed over Ramon's face, but then it faded and tears started in his eyes as he said simply, "Your good excellency, I would go anywhere with you, but then the Chin-Chan is my mother with the babies, and since father died I must be the man, for Sancho is too young. Adios." And he ran out so that they could not see him crying. From Just So Stories by Rudyard Kipling. The Elephant's Child. In the high and far-off times, the elephant, O best beloved, had no trunk. He had only a blackish bulgy nose as big as a boot, and he could wriggle about from side to side, but he couldn't pick up things with it. But there was one elephant, a new elephant, an elephant's child, who was full of insatiable curiosity. And that means he asked ever so many questions. And he lived in Africa, and he filled all Africa with his insatiable curiosities. He asked his tall aunt, the ostrich, why her tail feathers grew just so, and his tall aunt, the ostrich, spanked him with a hard, hard claw. He asked his tall uncle, the giraffe, what made his skin spotty, and his tall uncle, the giraffe, spanked him with his hard, hard hoof. And still he was full of insatiable curiosity. He asked his broad aunt, the hippopotamus, why her eyes were red, and his broad aunt, the hippopotamus, spanked him with a broad, broad hoof. And he asked his hairy uncle, the baboon, why melons tasted just so. And his hairy uncle, the baboon, spanked him with his hairy, hairy paw. And still he was full of insatiable curiosity. He asked questions about everything that he saw, or heard, or felt, or smelt, or touched. And all his uncles and his aunts spanked him. and still he was full of insatiable curiosity. One fine morning in the middle of the procession of the equinoxes, this insatiable elephant's child asked a new fine question that he had never asked before. He asked, "What does the crocodile have for dinner?" Then everybody said hush in a loud and dreadful tone, and they spanked him immediately and directly without stopping for a long time. By and by, when that was finished, he came upon Kolokolo Bird, sitting in the middle of a wait-a-bit thorn bush, and he said, "My father has spanked me, and my mother has spanked me. All my aunts and uncles have spanked me for my insatiable curiosity, and still I want to know what the crocodile has for dinner." The Kolokolo Bird said with a mournful cry, "Go to the banks of the great, green, grey, greasy Limpopo River, all set about with fever trees, and find out." That very next morning, when there was nothing left of the equinoxes because the procession had proceeded according to precedent, this insatiable elephant's child took 100 pounds of bananas, the little short red kind, and 100 pounds of sugar cane, the long purple kind, and 17 melons, the green crackly kind, and said to all his dear families, "Goodbye. I am going to the great grey, green, greasy Limpopo River, all set about with fever trees, to find out what the crocodile has for dinner." And they all spanked him once more for luck, though he asked them most politely to stop. Then he went away, a little warm, but not at all astonished, eating melons and throwing the rind about, because he could not pick it up. He went from Grahamstown to Kimberley, and from Kimberley to Karma's country, and from Karma's country he went east by north, eating melons all the time, till at last he came to the banks of the great grey-green, greasy Limpopo River, all set about with fever trees, precisely as Kolokolo Bird had said. Now you must know and understand, O best beloved, that till that very week and day and hour and minute, this insatiable elephant's child had never seen a crocodile and did not know what one was like. It was all his insatiable curiosity. The first thing he found was a bar-coloured python rock snake curled around a rock. "Excuse me," said the elephant's child, most politely, "but have you seen such a thing as a crocodile in these promiscuous parts?" "Have I seen a crocodile?" asked the bar-coloured python rock snake, in a voice of dreadful scorn. "What will you ask me next?" "Excuse me," said the elephant's child, "but could you kindly tell me what he has for dinner?" Then the bar-coloured python rock snake uncoiled himself very quickly from the rock and spanked the elephant's child with his scalesome, flailsome tail. "That is odd," said the elephant's child, "because my father and my mother and my aunt and my uncle, and not to mention my other aunt, the hippopotamus, and my other uncle, the baboon, have all spanked me for my insatiable curiosity. And I suppose this is the same thing." So he said goodbye very politely to the bar-coloured python rock snake and helped him to coil up on the rock again and went on, a little warm but not at all astonished, eating melons and throwing the rind about, because he could not pick it up, till he trod on what he thought was a log of wood at the very edge of the great grey-green, greasy Limpopo River, all set about with fever trees. But it was really the crocodile, O best beloved, and the crocodile winked one eye, like this. "Excuse me," said the elephant's child most politely, "but do you happen to have seen a crocodile in these promiscuous parts?" Then the crocodile winked the other eye and lifted half his tail out the mud, and the elephant's child stepped back most politely because he did not wish to be spanked again. "Come hither, little one," said the crocodile. "Why do you ask such things?" "Excuse me," said the elephant's child most politely, "but my father has spanked me, my mother has spanked me, not to mention my tall aunt, the ostrich, and my tall uncle, the giraffe, who can kick ever so hard, as well as my broad aunt, the hippopotamus, and my hairy uncle, the baboon, and including the bar-coloured python rock snake with a scalesome, flailsome tail just up the bank, who spanks harder than any of them. And so if it's quite all the same to you, I don't want to be spanked any more." "Come hither, little one," said the crocodile, "for I am the crocodile." And he wept crocodile tears to show that it was true. Then the elephant's child put his head down close to the crocodile's musky, tusky mouth, and the crocodile caught him by his little nose, which up to that very week, day, hour, and minute had been no bigger than a boot, though much more useful. "I think," said the crocodile, and he said it between his teeth like this, "I think today I will begin with elephant's child." At this, O best beloved, the elephant's child was much annoyed, and he said, speaking through his nose like this, "Let go, you're hurting me." Then the bar-coloured Python rock snake scuffled down from the bank and said, "My young friend, if you do not now immediately and instantly pull as hard as ever you can, it is my opinion that your acquaintance in the large patent leather ulster," and by this he meant the crocodile, "will jerk you into yonder limpid stream before you can say Jack Robinson." This is the way bar-coloured Python rock snakes always talk. Then the elephant's child sat back on his little haunches and pulled and pulled and pulled, and his nose began to stretch. And the crocodile floundered into the water, making it all creamy with great sweeps of his tail, and he pulled and pulled and pulled. And the elephant's child's nose kept on stretching, and the elephant child spread all his little four legs and pulled and pulled and pulled. And his nose kept on stretching, and the crocodile threshed his tail like an oar, and he pulled and pulled and pulled. And at each pull, the elephant's child's nose grew longer and longer, and it hurt him. Then the elephant's child felt his legs slipping, and he said through his nose, which was now nearly 5 feet long, "This is too much for me." Then the bar-coloured Python rock snake came down from the bank and knotted himself in a double clove hitch round the elephant's child's hind legs, and said, "Rash and inexperienced traveller, we will now seriously devote ourselves to a little high tension, because if we do not, it is my impression that yonder stealth-propelling man-of-war with the armour-plated upper deck," and by this, O best beloved, he meant the crocodile, "will permanently vitiate your future career." That is the way all bar-coloured Python rock snakes always talk. So he pulled, and the elephant's child pulled, and the crocodile pulled, but the elephant's child and the bar-coloured Python rock snake pulled the hardest. And at last the crocodile let go of the elephant's child's nose with a plop that you could hear all up and down the Limpopo. Then the elephant's child sat down most hard and sudden, but first he was careful to say thank you to the bar-coloured Python rock snake, and next he was kind to his poor pulled nose and wrapped it all up in cool banana leaves, and hung it in the grey-green, greasy Limpopo to cool. "What are you doing that for?" said the bar-coloured Python rock snake. "Excuse me," said the elephant's child, "but my nose is badly out of shape and I am waiting for it to shrink." "Then you will have to wait a long time," said the bar-coloured Python rock snake. "Some people do not know what is good for them." The elephant's child sat there for 3 days waiting for his nose to shrink, but it never grew any shorter, and besides it made him squint. For, O best beloved, you will see and understand that the crocodile had pulled it out into really, truly trunk, same as all elephants have today. At the end of the 3rd day, a fly came and strung him up. At the end of the 3rd day, a fly came and stung him on the shoulder, and before he knew what he was doing, he lifted up his trunk and hit that fly dead with the end of it. "Vantage number 1, said the bar-coloured Python rock snake. "You couldn't have done that with a mere smear nose. Try and eat a little now." Before he thought what he was doing, the elephant's child put out his trunk and plucked a large bundle of grass, dusted it clean against his forelegs, and stuffed it into his own mouth. "Vantage number 2, said the bar-coloured Python rock snake. "You couldn't have done that with a mere smear nose. Don't you think the sun is very hot here?" "It is," said the elephant's child, and before he thought what he was doing, he slooped up a sloop of mud from the banks of the great grey-green greasy Limpopo, and slapped it on his head, where it made a cool sloopy sloshy mud cap, all trickly behind his ears. "Vantage number 3, said the bar-coloured Python rock snake. "You couldn't have done that with a mere smear nose. Now, how do you feel about being spanked again?" "Excuse me," said the elephant's child, "but I should not like it at all." "How would you like to spank somebody?" said the bar-coloured Python rock snake. "I would like it very much indeed," said the elephant's child. Well, said the bar-coloured python rock snake, you will find that new nose of yours very useful to spank people with. Thank you, said the elephant's child. I'll remember that, and now I think I'll go home to all my dear families and try. So the elephant's child went home across Africa, frisking and whisking his trunk. When he wanted fruit to eat, he pulled fruit down from a tree instead of waiting for it to fall as he used to do. When he wanted grass, he plucked grass up from the ground instead of going onto his knees as he used to do. When the flies bit him, he broke off the branch of a tree and used it as a fly whisk, and he made himself a new, cool, slushy mud cap whenever the sun was hot. When he felt lonely walking through Africa, he sang to himself down his trunk, and the noise was louder than several brass bands. He went especially out of his way to find a broad hippopotamus. She was no relation of his, and spanked her very hard to make sure that the bar-coloured python rock snake had spoken the truth about his new trunk. The rest of the time he picked up the melon rinds that he had dropped on his way to the Limpopo, for he was a tidy pachyderm. One dark evening he came back to his dear families and he coiled up his trunk and said, "How do you do?" They were very glad to see him and immediately said, "Come here and be spanked for insatiable curiosity." "Pooh," said the elephant's child. "I don't think you peoples know anything about spanking, but I do, and I'll show you." Then he uncurled his trunk and knocked two of his dear brothers head over heels. "Oh, bananas," said they. "Where did you learn that trick, and what have you done to your nose?" "I got a new one from the crocodile on the banks of the great grey-green greasy Limpopo River," said the elephant's child. "I asked him what he had for dinner, and he gave me this to keep." "It looks very ugly," said his hairy uncle, the baboon. "It does," said the elephant's child, "but it's very useful." And he picked up his hairy uncle, the baboon, by one hairy leg and hove him into a hornet's nest. Then that bad elephant's child spanked all his dear families for a long time, till they were very warm and greatly astonished. He pulled out his tall ostrich's tail feathers, and he caught his tall uncle the giraffe by the hind leg and dragged him through a thorn bush. And he shouted at his broad aunt, the hippopotamus, and blew bubbles into her ear when she was sleeping in the water after meals. But he never let anyone touch the kolokolo bird. At last things grew so exciting that his dear families went off one by one in a hurry to the banks of the great grey-green greasy Limpopo River, all set out with fever trees, to borrow new noses from the crocodile. When they came back, nobody spanked anybody anymore, and ever since that day, O best beloved, all the elephants that you'll ever see, besides those that you won't, have trunks precisely like the trunk of the insatiable elephant's child. From Time and the Gods, by Lord Dunsany. A Legend of the Dawn. When the worlds and all began, the gods were stern and old, and they saw the beginning from under eyebrows hoar with years. All but Inzana, their child, who played with the golden ball. Inzana was the child of all the gods, and the law before the beginning and thereafter was that all should obey the gods. Yet hither and thither went all Pagana's gods to obey the Dawn Child, because she loved to be obeyed. It was dark all over the world, and even in Pagana, where dwelt the gods, it was dark when the child Inzana, the Dawn, first found her golden ball. Then running down the stairway of the gods with tripping feet, Chalcedony, onyx, step by step, she cast a golden ball across the sky. The golden ball went bounding up the sky, and the Dawn Child, with her flaring hair, stood laughing upon the stairway of the gods, and it was day. So gleaming fields below saw the first of the days, and the gods have destined. But towards evening, certain mountains, afar and aloof, conspired together to stand between the world and the golden ball, and to wrap their crags about it, and to shut it from the world. And all the world was darkened with their plot. And the Dawn Child up in Pagana cried for her golden ball. Then all the gods came down the stairway right to Pagana's gate to see what ailed the Dawn Child, and to ask her why she cried. Then Inzana said that her golden ball had been taken away and hidden by mountains black and ugly, far away from Pagana, all in a world of rocks under the rim of the sky, and she wanted her golden ball and could not love the dark. Thereat, Umbordom, whose hound was the thunder, took his hound in leash and strode away across the sky after the golden ball, until he came to the mountains afar and aloof. There did the thunder put his nose to the rocks and bay along the valleys, and fast at his heels followed Umbordom, and the nearer the hound the thunder came to the golden ball, the louder did he bay. But haughty and silent stood the mountains, whose plot had darkened the world. All in the dark among the crags in a mighty cavern guarded by two twin peaks, at last they found the golden ball for which the dawn child wept. Then under the world went Umbordom, with his thunder panting behind him, and came in the dark before the morning from underneath the world, and gave the dawn child back her golden ball. And Inzana laughed and took it in her hands, and Umbordom went back into Pagana, and at its threshold the thunder went to sleep. Again the dawn child tossed the golden ball far up into the blue across the sky, and the second morning shone upon the world, on lakes and oceans and on drops of dew. But as the ball went bounding on its way, the prowling mists and the rain conspired together and took it and wrapped it in their tattered cloaks and carried it away. And through the rents in their garments gleamed the golden ball, but they held it fast and carried it right away and underneath the world. Then on an onyx step Inzana sat down and wept, who could no more be happy without her golden ball. And again the gods were sorry, and the south wind came to tell her tales of most enchanted islands, to whom she listened not, nor yet to the tales of temples in lone lands that the east wind told her, who had stood beside her where she flung her golden ball. But from far away the west wind came with news of three grey travellers wrapped around with battered cloaks that carried away between them a golden ball. Then up leapt the north wind, he who guards the pole, and drew his sword of ice out of his scabbard of snow and sped away along the road that leads across the blue. And in the darkness underneath the world he met the three grey travellers and rushed upon them and drove them far before him, smiting them with his sword till their grey cloaks streamed with blood. And out of the midst of them, as they fled with flapping cloaks all red and grey and tattered, he leapt up with the golden ball and gave it to the dawn child. Again Inzana tossed the ball into the sky, making the third day, and up it went and fell across the fields. And as Inzana stooped to pick it up, she suddenly heard the singing of all the birds that were. All the birds in the world were singing all together, and also all the streams, and Inzana sat and listened and thought of no golden ball, nor ever of Chalcedonian onyx, nor of all her fathers the gods, but only of all the birds. Then in the woods and meadows where they all suddenly sung, they suddenly ceased. And Inzana, looking up, found her ball was lost, and all alone in the stillness one owl laughed. When the gods heard Inzana crying for her ball, they clustered together on the threshold and peered into the dark, but saw no golden ball. And leaning forward, they cried out to the bat as he passed up and down, "Bat that seest all things, where is the golden ball?" And though the bat answered, none heard, and none of the winds had seen it, nor any of the birds, and there was only the eyes of the gods in the darkness peering for the golden ball. Then said the gods, "Thou hast lost thy golden ball." And they made her a moon of silver to roll about the sky. And the child cried and threw it upon the stairway and chipped and broke its edges and asked for the golden ball. And Limpang Tung, the lord of music, who was the least of all the gods because the child cried still for her golden ball, stole out of Pagana and crept across the sky and found the birds of all the world sitting in trees and ivy and whispering in the dark. He asked them one by one for news of the golden ball. Some had last seen it on a neighbouring hill, and others in trees, though none knew where it was. A heron had seen it lying in a pond, but a wild duck in some reeds had seen it last as she came home across the hills, and then it was rolling very far away. At last the cock cried out that he had seen it lying beneath the world. There Limpang Tung sought it, and the cock called to him through the darkness as he went, until he found the golden ball. Then Limpang Tung went up into Pagana and gave it to the dawn child, who played with the moon no more. And the cock and all his tribe cried out, "We found it, we found the golden ball." Again Nzana tossed the ball afar, laughing with joy to see it. Her hands stretched upwards, her golden hair afloat, and carefully she watched it as it fell. But alas, it fell with a splash into the great sea and gleamed and shimmered as it fell till the waters became dark above it and could be seen no more. And men on the world said, "How the dew has fallen, and how the mist set in with breezes from the streams." But the dew was the tears of the dawn child, and the mists were her sighs, when she said, "There will no more come a time when I play with my ball again, for now it is lost forever." And the gods tried to comfort Nzana as she played with the silver moon, but she would not hear them, and went in tears to Slid, where he played with gleaming sails, and in his mighty treasury turned over gems and pearls and lorded it over the sea. And she said, "O Slid, whose soul is in the sea, bring back my golden ball." And Slid stood up, swarthy and clad in seaweed, and mightily dived from the last Chalcidian step out of Pagana's threshold, straight into the ocean. There on the sand among the battered navies of the Nautilus and broken weapons of the swordfish, hidden by dark water, he found the golden ball. And coming up in the night, all green and dripping, he carried it gleaming to the stairway of the gods, and brought it back to Nzana from the sea. And out of the hands of Slid she took it, and tossed it far and wide over his sails and sea, and far away it shone on lands that knew not Slid, till it came to its zenith and dropped towards the world. But ere it fell, the eclipse dashed out from his hiding, and rushed at the golden ball, and seized it with his jaws. When Nzana saw the eclipse bearing her plaything away, she cried aloud to Thunder, who burst from Pagana and fell howling upon the throat of Eclipse, who dropped the golden ball and let it fall towards the earth. But the black mountains disguised themselves as snow as the golden ball fell down towards them. They turned their peaks to ruby crimson, and their lakes to sapphires gleaming amongst silver, and Nzana saw a jeweled casket into which her plaything fell. But when she stooped to pick it up again, she found no jeweled casket with rubies, silvers, or sapphires, but only wicked mountains disguised in snow that had trapped her golden ball. And then she cried, because there was none to find it, for Thunder was far away chasing the eclipse, and all the gods lamented when they saw her sorrow. And Limpang Tung, who was least of all the gods, was yet the saddest at the dawn child's grief. And when the gods said, "Play with your silver moon," he stepped lightly from the rest, and coming down the stairway of the gods, playing an instrument of music, went out towards the world to find the golden ball, because Nzama wept. And into the world he went, till he came to the nether cliffs that stand by the inner mountains in the soul and heart of the earth, where the earthquake dwelleth alone, asleep but astir as he sleeps, breathing and moving his legs and grunting aloud in the dark. Then in the ear of the earthquake, Limpang Tung said a word that only the gods may say, and the earthquake started to his feet and flung the cave away, the cave wherein he slept between the cliffs, and shook himself and went galloping abroad, and overturned the mountains that hid the golden ball, and bit the earth beneath them, and hurled the crags about, and covered himself with rocks and fallen hills, and went back ravening and growling to the soul of the earth, and there lay down and slept again for 100 years. And the golden ball rolled free, passing under the shattered earth, so rolled back to Pagana, and Limpang Tung came home to the onyx step, and took the dawn child by the hand, and told not what he had done, but had said it was the earthquake, and went away to sit at the feet of the gods. But Nzana went and patted the earthquake on the head, for she said it was dark and lonely in the soul of the earth. Thereafter, returning step by step, Chalcedony onyx, Up the stairway of the gods she cast again her golden ball from the threshold afar to the blue to gladden the world and the sky, and laughed to see it go. And far away, Tragul, upon the utter rim, turned a page that was numbered 6 in a cipher that none might read. And as the golden ball went through the sky to gleam on lands and cities, there came the fog towards it, stooping as he walked with his dark brown cloak about him, and behind him slunk the night. And as the golden ball rolled past the fog, suddenly night snarled and sprang upon it and carried it away. Hastily Inzana gathered the gods and said, "The night hath seized my golden ball, and no god alone can find it now. For none can say how far night may roam, who prowls all around us and out beyond the worlds." At the entreaty of their dawn child, all the gods made themselves stars for torches, and far away through all the sky followed the tracks of night as far as he prowled abroad. And at one time Slid, with the Pleiads in his hand, came nigh to the golden ball, and at another Yoharneth Lahai, holding Orion for a torch. But lastly Limpang Tung, bearing the morning star, found the golden ball far away under the world, near to the lair of night. And all the gods seized the golden ball, and night turning smote out the torches of the gods, and thereafter slunk away. And all the gods in triumph marched up the gleaming stairway of the gods, all praising little Limpang Tung, who through the chase had followed night so close in search of the golden ball. Then far below on the world a human child cried out to the dawn child for the golden ball. And Inzana ceased from her play that illumined world and sky, and cast the ball from the threshold of the gods to the little human child that played in the fields below, and would one day die. And the child played all day with the golden ball down in the little fields where the humans lived, and went to bed at evening and put it beneath his pillow and went to sleep. And no one worked in all the world because the child was playing. And the light of the golden ball streamed up from under the pillow and out through the half-shut door and shone in the western sky. And Yoharneth Lahai in the night time tiptoed into the room and took the ball gently, for he was a god, away from under the pillow, and brought it back to the dawn child to gleam on an onyx step. But some day night shall seize the golden ball and carry it right away and drag it to his lair, and Slid shall dive from the threshold to the sea to see if it be there, and coming up when the fishermen draw their nets find it not, nor yet discover it among the sails. Limpang Tung shall seek among the birds and shall not find it when the cock is mute, and up into the valleys shall go Umborodom to seek among the crags. And when the hound, the thunder, shall chase the eclipse and all the gods go seeking with their stars, but never find the ball. And men, no longer having light to the golden ball, shall pray to the gods no more, who, having no worship, shall no more be gods. These things be hidden even from the gods. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepy Time Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get new episodes whenever they come out. A reminder that the music for tonight is Un Desire by Kumiko. Check out more of their work on their website, which you will find linked in the show notes. Good night, and sweet dreams.